Hi, Albert, are you there?
Uh, I'm here. At least my
You
voice is here.
okay, cool. If you
I don't
want,
know.
you froze for a second, and that's what made me
Yeah,
pause the introduction. You
right.
want, do you want to log in and log back out, and I'll make sure I edit it from the time you
Yeah,
come
let me
back?
try that. Hold on.
Okay. Sometimes we get technical difficulties. You know, I remember doing stuff from my phone, so I don't hate on other people. I'm gonna, okay, here we go. Hi, Albert. How are you doing?
Hi, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm good. So let me start my spill. Okay, in three, two. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I am your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. I will be announcing him in a second, but I just wanted to say that, I have 18 questions for him, and this is not going to go the same as a past, present, and future. So, can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Well, my name is Albert Lanier, and I'm calling from Honolulu, Hawaii. As to who I am, I'm a former journalist and freelance writer, and currently I remain a writer, and I'm ghostwriter technically. But I also write two newsletters on Substack, but I'm here not to talk about those. I'm here to talk about my podcast because I got into podcasting last year. So I've been a podcaster for about over a year now, and I'm the host of two podcasts. The first is a show called Final Cut, which is the same name as my newsletter. In fact, it's a promotional podcast, promotional vehicle for my podcast, for my newsletter. And
Okay.
so, of course, so it's Final Cut, the newsletter, and Final Cut, the podcast. Kind of like that movie Spaceballs, I guess. I guess next is Final Cut, the flamethrower. I don't know. Or Final Cut, the lunchbox, something like that. In any
So what?
event, I Final Cut, the podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
then I have another podcast, which Final Cut, the podcast, is about film. And so besides Final Cut, the podcast, I just wrapped production on the first season, very, very short season, of a writing podcast called The Write-Off. So I did very small amount of episodes, about 4 episodes. Again, I'm kind of, even though I've done this for about a year, I'm kind of still new to podcasting. I got about over a year's experience, but The Write-Off is a podcast that deals with different writing areas, different writing fields. So I'm the host of not only The Write-Off, which is a podcast about writing, and you can find that at thumbsdown.substack.com, but also Final Cut, and you can find that podcast at allanier.substack.com. And both Final Cut and The Write-Off can be found on Spotify. So you can go to Spotify to find both Final Cut and The Write-Off podcast.
What inspired the name Final Cut for your podcast, and how does this reflect your no holds barred approach to dissecting films?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say that the title comes from the newsletter, but the title of the newsletter was one of 3 that I had. I was trying to decide which of 3 titles to go with. The first was one called Deep Focus, and I decided not to do that because I didn't want people to think it was about massage or something. But
Sure.
the second was called Working Title, which was, I thought, a nice title itself. Kind of obvious, but I liked that as a name for the podcast. And then I came up with Final Cut. And Final Cut, of course, is basically what the cut of a movie, basically the final cut or the final product of a movie, uh, whether it's by a studio or a film company or a distributor or a director, right? Often in Hollywood, directors couldn't get and still can't get final cut if they work in the studios, or as I like to call them, the majors. So final cut, I guess, is my final cut on film. It's my view, but it's also my own stamp. You know, like a final cut for a director is everything he wants in a movie. I guess for me, Final Cut, not only as a newsletter, but primarily as a podcast, is everything that I want to talk about in regards to movies and films.
Okay, and as a former journalist and film reviewer, how has your background shaped the raw, unfiltered vibe of Final Cut's episodes?
I think I was thinking of something that Gene Siskel of Siskel and Ebert, the famous film critic pair that were out of Chicago, said once. I saw an interview he had done on YouTube. And he said that what he did as a film critic is he brought the same kind of skill as a reporter, as a journalist, because Gene Siskel was a journalist. He's a film critic, but he was also a journalist for the Chicago Tribune. He brought that same kind of beat reporter mentality to film criticism. And I think when I look at the podcast, if I base it on my background as a freelance journalist, because I covered a lot of things as a journalist outside of being a film reviewer. So I think I bring kind of that reporter's mindset, a reporter's mindset to it. I mean, when I covered film festivals in Hawaii, which was primarily how I was a film critic and reviewer, I found, and I think about it now, but I found that I had to take the skills that I had as a reporter, as a journalist, and use them in covering film festivals. You talk to people, you develop sources, you find out what's going on during the festival week, where things are going to be happening if it's not scheduled or it's not part of the record yet. If there are changes, if, films change or film screenings for films change, events change. A celebrity who's supposed to come can't come. You're always having to have your ears attenuated and your eyes focused. I didn't want to mention nose because that's a cliche in regards to journalists. So I would agree kind of with Gene Siskel in that you bring your reporter's sense of diligence and of fact gathering and of determining what's occurring and what's happening. I brought that to film criticism and reviewing, especially because I was covering film festivals.
Well said, well said. If you can remember, in episode 20, you dive into standout film analysis. What made this movie or that movie the perfect final cut to wrap a milestone episode? Do you remember it? Episode 20?
Of the Final Cut podcast. Yes. I think, I think with the podcast, especially the second season, it was a very different season. So this gives me an opportunity to talk about the podcast itself in terms of, the first season, I was actually reading articles that I had read. That's how I started out with that podcast. I was just reading articles. It was about 8 or 9 minute episodes. And the whole point of Final Cut to me was to do short episodes because it's a promotional podcast. That's the reason that it was created. it's not really a podcast that is organic and hold unto itself. It is kind of related to and dependent upon the newsletter. That's how it was created. That's how it was birthed and came into being. And so I think with the podcast in the second season this year, 2025, it was more what I call commentary tracks. So I wanted to talk about the articles instead of reading the articles out. And so I think that worked very successfully. So anything that was an episode, including episode 20, worked because it was about setting up the listener to go and read the article or to go to my newsletter. Now, how much traffic I was able to pull, I don't know, right? I can't really tell from the downloads or the numbers unless I try to compare it. But I think that was the focus. So I think anything that was chosen, including the last episode, I think it was really about the commentary track, describing the article, describing the piece, and getting people to go and read the piece.
Well said. And do you know how to start looking for how many followers? How many followers are you hoping to gain from this?
In terms of the podcast, I think I've taken a look at the data a little. Unfortunately, I've been busier because, as you know, the first time I was on your show, I was on a promotional tour. Mm-hmm. So I was promoting the newsletters, and the podcast and other shows, but I was promoting the newsletters and the podcast and other shows. But so I haven't really. I've looked at the data maybe like a few times. Recently, I haven't. I've been I think I've been much too focused on like the promotional tour and getting on shows and being interviewed and putting the word out there.
Well, I think you're doing pretty good. You have 2,332 followers on Twitter, and you have 147 subscribers as recent uploads. That is good. That is really good for a year in Anaho. That's pretty cool.
That's the Final Cut, I gather, right?
Final Cut has 2,332 followers on X. Do you do shows on Twitter?
I don't. Oh. That's interesting.
Oh. Yes.
I don't.
I know that either way it goes, this is you. Writer Albert Lanier, 3434 has 147 subscribers as
well. Oh yeah, that's the YouTube channel. That's the YouTube channel.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about the YouTube channel is this. That's my official channel. The channel's been around, I think, since, if I remember, 2002, because I did have a presence on YouTube. I was on Facebook, I was on X, and of course I'm on Instagram, I'm on Blue Sky, but I didn't have anything on YouTube. I didn't really know much about YouTube, and I decided to set up the channel. The channel, here's the interesting thing. The channel itself was about 90 subscribers, and I wasn't doing much because I was too busy with my newsletter. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I was doing on the channel, I done a show called Looking Into, which is short form true crime. And I like doing that, but eventually I just didn't feel the audience was big enough. And I do a show called Outro, which is a show about shows. It's about being on shows, being interviewed on shows, doing programs, doing podcast, radio, if I did TV, cable access, whatever. And what happened was at the beginning of my promotional tour, I was on a show called Thursday Things. I was invited to do the show. And that's about YouTube content creators. And they got me subscribers. I was at 90 some odd subscribers.
Where is this at
They
again?
said to their audience, go ahead.
Where is this at again, Albert? Who
It's
got
a
you
show
this?
called Thursday's Things. I was invited to come on the show. And they, at one point during the show, had said to their audience, subscribe to his channel. And I got over 100 subscribers. I went over 100. So it, it,
Albert, you're going in and out.
the channel's been revitalized because
Albert, I don't mean to say anything, but you're going in and out.
We now return to our regularly scheduled programming already in progress.
Go ahead.
So it was the show Thursday's Things that put me over the top. Like at that point, I was busy promoting. I have to be brutally honest. When I used to do media, I knew nothing about promoting or marketing. I still don't. I never had to do any of those things. I just wrote articles, got paid, moved on to the next article. And then when I created the newsletter Final Cut, and when I went into podcasting, that meant that you've got to get the word out because you got to create an audience. When you're online, you've got to create an audience. An audience doesn't just show up unless you're famous. Then you can get an audience to come. But you have to create an audience. I know nothing about creating an audience. I'll be very honest. I know absolutely nothing about it. So I've had to kind of learn. And since I was already doing media, I was going on podcasts like this. I came back to doing YouTube. Thursday's Things was one reason that I came back to doing YouTube. But Thursday's Things, the show Thursday's Things, they got me over 100 subscribers, and it's been growing ever since. So I'm what am I, like 140 something? I checked it recently. Yeah, I'm 147. So I was earlier, like maybe a month ago, I was in the early 90s. The show Thursday's Things has certainly helped my YouTube channel.
Have you wrote a professional
So I owe
article?
them thanks for that.
Albert, have you wrote a professional article about you being on these various podcast shows? Like, for
I
instance,
haven't written about being on podcasts. You know it. No, I never written an article. The articles that I write are for my newsletter. So I'm, writing reviews on Retro Review, which is my film review newsletter, and I write film analysis essays and personal essays and other kinds of essays and articles on Final Cut. I've never written about being on podcasts or radio shows or talk shows. I've never written an article about it. No, I've never written.
yeah, the reason why I asked is because maybe that'll get you more followers, or another avenue is claim a Google Knowledge panel. And since you have to make yourself visible amongst all platforms, and you claim your own, don't get nobody to do it for you, claim your own, so that when they look up your name, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and all of that'll pop up, and it'll show your picture and everything. That's what I had to do. So and it's free. It's free, but it takes a while and it's hard to get.
I see. Well, I'll keep that in mind. But I mean, for me, it's really, it's really just been kind of busy since last year. The newsletters. But I'm new to podcasting. I've been new to podcasting, and that's taken up a lot of time. I did a podcast last year called Outside the NFL, and that really, I liked the show, but it was a tough experience. It wasn't really comfortable, but it was an interesting experience. I was doing this weekly podcast for about 18 weeks, the length of the NFL season, and I guess that's led to what I do now, which is I'm taking a break as I do this interview. I'm taking a break from looking at NFL. I'm taking a break from the NFL because I have to keep up with scores. Because I do a call in on a show in California tomorrow. I do it on Mondays, where I analyze NFL games. So NFL hot topics. So I'm on a show called The Writer Report, which is I guess live from Temecula, California. So it's interesting where your life takes you. I was
Yeah.
a freelance writer and journalist who had really nothing to do with sports. I covered a couple of boxing matches a couple times, and I wrote maybe an article for a sports publication. I never was a sports reporter, sports writer. And now here I am on a show in California, a small little sports show in California, talking about the NFL. So life is strange. It's great. It's intriguing. It's fascinating at times where you can end up as a person. You never know where you're going to end up.
There's this program, I forgot what it's, KCAA. I used to pay for advertisement time. It was called KCAA. If I still had the money, I would still do it, but they network out to 2 million Californians, and it's costly, but it was definitely worth it. And one more thing I wanted to tell you, I told you about the Google panel and everything. Twitter is another thing to get on and go live off of.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. Yeah, I'm on X.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay,
but I
that's
mostly
I'm
do.
just trying to
I
throw out.
mostly, I promote my stuff. Like I said, I promote on the basic platforms, social media platforms, Facebook, X, Instagram,
What
Blue
about
Sky,
LinkedIn? What about LinkedIn?
LinkedIn. I have a page. I've had a page for years.
You don't
But
have to pay to go live.
um, yeah, I mean, I have a page, but I'm retired from, like being a journalist and freelancing. So LinkedIn really hasn't worked out really hasn't been much of an impact for me.
I don't pay for my subscription to LinkedIn because there's nothing I can get out of it. So you're right.
Right.
You're right.
It's fine. I have a page there, but yeah, I mean, the online stuff, when I retired in 2017, what I found was just taking track of all the stuff I have online is a job in and of itself. I can
Yeah.
see why they hire like digital media managers or whatever they call them. Like, that's really a job. I mean, I understand this from my own, like I did an interview with a filmmaker for my Final Cut newsletter yesterday. And I, wrote it up. I did the interview in the morning, and wrote it up, and was having to promote it on all my platforms. Anything I do, I got to start with all the platforms. Excuse me, and then move on from there.
Okay. Okay. And what would you like to happen for the future of you going on podcasts? Where do you want to see yourself? Because I don't care about the age. The sky is the limit. There are doctors that's making money, 90, 100 years old, still in the business of working. Where do you see yourself?
Well, I'm a lot busier in retirement than I thought I was going to be. I, 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 I retired when I was 46 in 2017. I wasn't quite 47 yet. And I've been retired for 8 years. And people say, you're not really retired. You're semi-retired. I get that thrown at me at times. And, you know, my motto has always been to keep busy, but don't be busy. And now my motto is kind of in shreds with what happened from 2024 on, starting Final Cut, and then starting Final Cut, Final Cut, the newsletter in April 2024, then the podcast in June 2024, and then doing in September Outside the NFL as a podcast in September 2024, and till about so, and then doing the write-off this year. So it's in terms of podcasting, and it's been very interesting. I didn't ever want to host a podcast. I never wanted to host a podcast. And I kind of realized, because I thought, who wants to listen to me? You get me on a show, I can talk. That's no problem. But I never really wanted to host anything in my life. Now, I shouldn't say that as the host of what has been 3 podcasts. I shouldn't say that. But it's true. You know, I'm going to be frank. I didn't want to do a podcast, but Substack allowed me the chance to do a podcast. I could easily set one up. I did. I've learned to be a podcaster by being a podcaster. I didn't look at a tutorial. I didn't read a book. I didn't read an article. I think because I realized in my later years now, I'm in my 50s, I would rather go out and get things done and kind of learn on the spot and kind of learn by doing, like on the job, training myself, sort of like learning here, but also being an autodidact. And that's the way it's been since I've retired in 2017. So, you know, podcasting has been very interesting. What would I like to do? You know, I do kind of like podcasting. I kind of enjoy it. I didn't think I would, but I do kind of enjoy it. So I hope the podcast do better. I hope the write-off does better. I've only done 4 episodes, the write-off, but that was deliberate because I had done Outside the NFL, and I had done, 18 weeks. And that basically taught me as much as I need to know. I could learn more, obviously. But that taught me a lot about producing and hosting a podcast. That was kind of a trial by fire. It was getting out, because I will tell you, doing a sports podcast, to me, is one of the hardest podcasts you could ever do. And you better be right to a certain extent.
Yeah.
You better be right. So, by contrast, when I do the writer report, like I will tomorrow, it's a walk in the park. All I have to do is sit down here, which I call my interview bench or my interview stool here. All I have to do is sit down here and, talk about how the Chargers did or how the Seahawks are doing. Seahawks are doing well. I know you're in Seattle. Seahawks are doing well. Unfortunately, the Mariners is close to the World Series, but didn't happen. Because I remember I used to live in Seattle. I remember when I was living in Seattle when the Mariners actually went to the playoffs. I think it was for the first time. That city was on fire. It was fantastic. There's nothing like a city that has a sports franchise in the playoffs or even in the finals. It's really quite something. But yeah, I'd like to see where podcasting goes. I'd like to see, and I'd like to get back to broadcasting more. I'd love to go work in radio again. I really would. You know, I've been a writer for 31 years, and the only thing I haven't done is write a book. And for whatever reason, I haven't had the time to do it or the inclination. It's also a business, so quite frankly, interested in like self-publishing. I'm interested in traditional publishing. So, you know, but yeah, you know, when I look back, maybe it's full circle. You know, I'm doing this show in Temecula, California called The Writer Report. People can listen to it at mixlr.com. That's mixlr.com. On Mondays, I'm on Mondays. I do the NFL Hot Topics segment and analyze the games. And I got to get back to that once I'm done with this interview. And then, of course, I just wrapped production on The Write-Off, which is about writing. And it's about different writing fields. So the first episode of The Write-Off is about freelance writing, which is logical because I was a freelance writer for 22 years. The second is about ghostwriting. I've been a ghostwriter for 10 years. And then there are a couple more episodes. The last one for the season, only 4. So don't worry, it's not a lot of episodes. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. The last one's called, I think, Main Character Complex, which is about my 31 years as a writer. So people can go to The Write-Off. They can go to thumbsdown.substack.com, or they can go to Spotify. So that's Spotify or thumbsdown.substack.com to listen to my writing podcast, The Write-Off. As for Final Cut, I've done 2 seasons. We'll see whether I'm going to do a third. You know, I'd have to take a look at the numbers. But so far it's been great doing Final Cut. Because I'm debating whether I should go and do a new film-oriented podcast. So I'm debating that. But people can check out Final Cut also on Spotify. So you can go to Spotify and listen to Final Cut. But you can also go to allanier.substack.com. That's allanier.substack.com. So maybe I'm kind of going full circle here. I don't really know. I don't know, but I seem to be moving toward broadcast. Doing the Writer Report in California. I'm doing my 2 podcasts, Final Cut and The Write-Off. And I did radio a long time ago. I was a board operator in an oldies rock station. So maybe this is, you talked before about past, present, future, right? We're not supposed to deal with that in this episode. But the past, where I was doing radio and broadcasting to a minor extent, I was a board op. And then the present, after many years, I seem to be returning somewhat to broadcasting in some form. So what the future will hold? Hopefully more broadcasting. I mean, I'd love to go back to radio. I actually would like to go back to radio. But I haven't worked in radio in 30 years. So if anyone's interested in Seattle or anywhere else in the country in hiring me to be a radio personality, I'd entertain it, certainly.
Y'all hear that, Seattleans? if you need him to be a host of a radio station, you know, he's looking for
I'd
work
like to come back to Seattle, actually.
Yeah, that would be
I'd like to come back to Seattle. I lived there in the 90s, so I'd love to come back. I'd love to come back. It's a great city.
Thank you.
Sorry about the Mariners, folks.
So once again, how can the people reach you?
Yeah, you know how they can reach me. Well, for booking information for doing shows, they can go to my email. They can email me at imperiousreader@gmail.com. That's IMPERIOUSREADER at gmail.com. That's for bookings on shows like this. If they want to check out my podcasts, I'll make it simple for them right now. You can check out the write-off and Final Cut and go to by going to Spotify. So go to Spotify and look for the write-off and Final Cut. And of course, if you're on YouTube and you're interested in my YouTube channel is at writer Albert Lanier 3434. I actually have a new show, short form show about football called The Wise Guy Show. And it's on its 7th episode, 7th week. So The Wise Guy Show, which is all about football. I do analysis of football just like I do on the Writer Report. And you could go to at writer Albert Lanier 3434. That's writer Albert Lanier on YouTube.
Why would they want to watch your shows? Can you give them an insight of why they would like to watch your shows, and why is it beneficial to watch your sports shows? Before we end.
Sports shows, if you're a fan of the NFL, you follow football. But I will say my show is an analysis show. So I don't do picks. So no gambling, folks. Sorry. Especially if you're an ex-NBA player or coach. You can't watch my show. Sorry, guys. You can't watch the show. Sorry. No picks. It's not a pick six show, which is what I call a gambling show. So no gambling. None of that. It's just straight analysis. If you're a fan of the NFL, you follow football, perfect for you. And you can go ahead and check out the Wise Guy Show on YouTube.
What have you learned so far about the NFL? How long have you been tracking NFL down, by the way?
Well, I'm brand new to doing analysis on the show, meaning the Writer Report. The Writer Report, I believe, is a new sports show. And so I was asked to come on, and I was interviewed 1 week. I think it was the 3rd week. And then I was asked to come on every week and do analysis of the show. And I think that was primarily because I had done Outside the NFL, which of course is on Spotify. It's still on Spotify, and I believe it's at allanier.substack.com, but I only did 1 season. But I think it was doing a podcast, obviously on football, that probably gave me maybe the credentials, I guess, if you could call it that, gave me the enough of a background where I could come on a show and discuss football.
Okay. Stay on the line. Thank you everyone for joining my show today. Y'all take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys another time. Bye.
Never waste my time, you are I want.